Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Nigel Tunnacliffe, and he is the CEO of Coastline Academy, where they do driver's education, if I get that right, the student driver courses and classes. And I'm really interested in learning from you today. We were chatting a little bit before the show. First of all, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then before we jump into kind of the real meat of who you guys are and what you're building and buying, I want our customers, our listeners, I should say, I want them to know who you are. Kind of how did you get into this? Were you an entrepreneur from start? Kind of the running joke has always been you were born and now you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions. How in the hell did you end up here? So we'll just start with that. What's your origin story, man? When did you know you were an entrepreneur?
Sure. I mean, I've known I was an entrepreneur since I was a kid, basically. And, the idea of having a regular job never really excited me. And so through high school and college, I was doing little startups here and there, just kind of small business stuff. And then I went off to do my MBA at Oxford, sort of a program focused on entrepreneurship. And this was sort of the path I was on. Then I ended up working in tech in the Bay Area, and through that kind of got some of that bigger, highly scalable company experience, and did that long enough to learn a lot, but just long enough also to realize that I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And so I partnered up with a colleague of mine. We loved working together and decided we wanted to put our skill and experience and time into something that would have a bigger impact. And so we started Coastline in 2017 with the mission to eradicate car crashes. And we built what at the time was intended to be the first national driving school with the clear mandate to not do a roll up. We were just going to build it brick by brick across the country and do it organically. And fast forward a few years, we found that the licensing process, every state has its own sort of licensing environment, and it takes quite a long time to get a license in a new state. So we thought, okay, well, we can shortcut this by buying a small local driving school in one of the markets we're entering. And that went so well that we thought, oh, you know what? Actually, this is actually a pretty good way to continue growing. And there's a lot of folks out there who run great local driving schools and are looking to retire. And now that's sort of a core part of our strategy. And so here I am on a show about mergers and acquisitions.
So interesting path. A lot of us, it's usually one of two things. People either are accidental entrepreneurs, meaning that they never intended on being one, but they had a really good skill and people started hiring them to do things or do that skill. And next thing they know, they had a full blown business. Or they're like you and me, where you just kind of had it in your blood. You probably had entrepreneurial style parents. I did. I know I did. My dad was always doing something on the side. And then he went into metalworking. He would make the metal boxes for air conditioning systems and stuff because I have 37 cousins and probably half a dozen of them do heat and air. Dad has a lot of brothers and sisters. A lot of them do heat and air. So he would build their boxes and stuff and have those big metal bending machines in the office. So there was always something going on at our house. So I'm sure something exposed you to the idea that, you could just go make money on your own. Something was a catalyst there, right?
Yeah. My dad he ended up starting a business doing IT work after working for other folks for a while, and then getting laid off. And then it was like, oh, well, I can just do this. And so, yeah, early exposure to that. And yeah, it also just really resonated with me. I'm a creative person, and I sort of looking for the angles and sort of like, okay, well, how can I do this differently? What's, questioning the status quo. And so, yeah, I guess I came by it honestly.
It's interesting. My son came to me, he's 13, and he says, "Dad, when you buy businesses, will you buy me one? I want a summer job." And he goes, "I want a summer job." And so he sat down with my wife, his mom, and they brought a business plan. And we're in the midst of, we didn't buy one because there wasn't something already doing what they want to do, but we're building it out. They're going to do a concessions type of thing at all the farmers markets and stuff. Usually, when you start a business, there's a problem you see in the industry that you're trying to solve. I said you said
Mhm.
no more crashes, but was that the underlying, what was the underlying thing? You're like, "Hey, we could do this a lot better than what's going on currently in the industry."
Yeah, so our the sort of the seed was car crashes are the leading cause of death of young people. With technology where it is today, with we're solving all these other kinds of problems that are either very important or maybe like not that important. Like yeah, okay, it's convenient if someone brings you your food instead of going to get it yourself or whatever. But what does that really do for the world? And so we kind of started with that huge problem of why are so many young people impacted by car crashes? And then knowing that was the overall theme, we interviewed hundreds of new drivers and their families to kind of understand what it was that they are worried about, thinking about, etc. And we expected this to be more of a technology solution. But what we heard over and over was just that the thing they thought about the most was their actual learning to drive experience. And there's never been a national driving school. There are some great schools, some places, and every now and then we heard a story about a great driving instructor. But more often than not, we were hearing the opposite. The school that wouldn't return their phone calls, they were always full, or the instructor didn't show up, or whatever, just the sort of small business, not super high focus on customer experience, having to call and book or bring cash or write a check or whatever. And so we heard that enough times that we thought, okay, well, let's figure out what is going on in the driving education industry that's making it like this for essentially everybody. And what we discovered is that the driving education industry as we know it today didn't start with the Model T in the 20s. It actually started in the 90s when the driver's ed was cut from high school programs.
Mhm.
And so it went from being most kids in America learn to drive at high school to no kids in America learn to drive at high school. And so you had this entire generation of small businesses started by high school driver's ed instructors, gym teachers, etc. Now all those folks are reaching retirement, and they've built, a lot of them have built great small businesses. But to make a small business something that can be passed on, you either need interest within your family or somebody wanting to take it over who actually wants to run the business and be there every day out on the road driving and answering the phones and what have you, or what. And so that kind of is what got us interested in this industry and what made us think, okay, well, there's a whole generation of these businesses that are going to not be around anymore. And we can build a national brand, use technology at the core to make the whole customer experience better, to make it safer, build more trust with families. And then it was just later that we kind of found that actually, in addition to doing what we're doing on the technology side and on the branding side and operations side, we could also support the retirement of this generation of driving school owners by buying their schools.
Interesting. When you said solving the problem of teenage wrecks, and that's the highest mortality rate is accidents within a certain time range, the first thing that came to my mind was, I've got quite a few friends. I grew up I learned driving a little different than most. I grew up on a farm, right? That said, I think the biggest contributor to car wrecks in that teenage years probably has to be panic under stressful environment. So something runs in front of them, they panic. Somebody does something unexpected, they don't know how to react. That type of stuff. how does a driving school like, all the driving schools, I think of the old high school ones, right? Like, we had one in our I'm dated old enough that there was one at our high school. I didn't have to go just because, like I said, I'd been driving the farm truck delivering hay from one farmer to another without even a license from the time I could my dad actually Belling wired wooden blocks to the brake and the gas so I could reach the pedals and drive. How do you teach kids how to not panic? How do you teach drivers to react under panicful situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also had a lot of track driving experience coming into this, and sort of before starting Coastline,
Yep.
I was just doing lap day track days in the Miata
Yeah.
and such. And through that, you get a bit of a different perspective about driving.
Mhm.
And I think it's one of the things I learned racing is that it's not about going faster; it's about slowing it down in your mind. And
Mhm.
so, if you can do that on the road as well, that can help when there's a sort of an emergency situation. And if you have sort of built the right set of skills and you can kind of slow it down in your mind and execute your plan, then you can get out of it safely.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things we teach is about you basically assume that every car out there is coming to get you in some way. What happens if this truck pulls into your lane? What happens if this door opens on this car as you're driving up? What happens if someone pulls out of this driveway? And if you are thinking about that all the time as you're driving, and it's one of the things that for me as a driving instructor, like I would continually have as a dialogue with the student is like what scanning for threats, scanning for potential situations, and it's like, okay, what happens if this person pulls out of the driveway? What would you do? You got to think about it. Okay, well, would I slam on the brakes? Well, check the mirror behind you. Is there someone tailgating you? Would you pull out into the other lane? Is there anyone coming that way? And so, if you can continually build and update a plan, then when there's a moment to panic, you don't need to panic because it's not like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? You just execute the plan.
Yeah. That said, people do have time, and if they're trained in that, or if you've been prepped to go think about, okay, you're gonna have to things are gonna slow down in the moment. You're gonna have to make a decision, and it's not panic lock, right?
Mm.
That's brilliant. You're doing that. Let's talk about you're buying something that almost in any other industry, like I've avoided a couple industries because there's like it's dominated by what we call solo entrepreneurs or even owner operators who are just so involved in their business. But you've done something really creative in the fact that you can buy those. I can
Hmm.
give you a couple industries like we looked at and like, yeah, you just can't jump into them. Pool cleaning services. They go for 1x multiples all the time. You're thinking you could buy it and pay it off in a year. But most of the time it's father, son, or one guy and one other person, and they do every single client. Right. So
Yeah.
if you don't have some infrastructure like you've built out, you can't do that. A lot of times small heat and air companies are this way, right?
Hmm.
The owner is the key operator. Those things can almost never sell. So tell me about you were already looking to I love the model because you were already looking to expand into these cities. So you already knew what it
Hmm.
looked like to set up one from scratch. And this became a shortcut for you as opposed to all of us acquisition entrepreneurs look for something that's already up and running. We don't have that standard operating procedure, right? We're looking to buy that as
Hmm.
part of the package. So is that what enabled you to buy
Yeah.
these little guys? You kinda already know you really have your own systems and processes down, and you're looking for
Yeah.
their location and their clients?
Yeah, so if you think about it, if you're buying a business that does 3 or 4 million in revenue a year and has reasonable margins, you can buy that business even if it doesn't have a general manager. You can hire somebody, and there's still some cash left at the end of the day. If you're buying a business that does 500K in revenue, if you hire a general manager, you're losing money every year, right? And so that means your sort of typical business buyer isn't going to be interested at this size.
Mhm.
And so that means that the any other buyer in the space has to be someone just like you said with the pool routes. You got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get out there and test chlorine every day, right? And so in our case, we've built out the infrastructure. So the first thing we built when we were creating Coastline is we built the tech platform that runs our business. And we built it with the intention of being the only customer of that product that would be built in a way that it might otherwise be sold to other businesses, right? Like so we sort of built it as its own product with one customer. And so when we make an acquisition that is small like that, we can pull them onto our platform that makes things run more efficiently. It enables the back end services that sort of streamline the operation. Customer facing side, there's an easy way to book and reschedule your lessons and see what's coming up and get notifications and all that. And then on the operations side, it manages your team with driving instructor schedules and payroll and all of that. And then sort of the third side is customer support, right? So our support team is centralized and uses the platform to as the customer CRM and everything. So that's sort of one of the key building blocks. And then we also have our fleet operations team that manages our fleet of cars. We have our sort of instructor operations team that supports our team of instructors. And so when we take a school that is too small to have its own general manager, well, that doesn't matter because what we're doing is we're replacing the owner operator with our whole platform of services. And so that kind of it enables the business to continue running and actually run more efficiently than it did before because it's got the whole sort of set of support. And so I think that's one of the things that enables us to do this. And then the other thing is when we enter a new market, we are buying a school, but then we're also growing it. So then we can kind of grow into neighboring suburbs and add sort of more volume in a same store sales basis and therefore kind of grow it in a way that the sort of owner operator might struggle to do so because we can buy more cars. We have a recruiting team that can help hire and train more instructors, and we can, apply the same sort of growth engine that got us to where we are today organically. We apply that to the post acquisition time period.
So do you guys have you mentioned having a fleet, of cars. So the thing that comes to my mind is like in this business, if I was looking to buy a driving education school, the first thing I want to know is what's the liability of this thing, right? I've got new drivers. The insurance has to be through the roof to insure this company. You got new drivers, and if you're acquiring somebody else's business, your due diligence has to be thorough that they don't have pre-existing injury lawsuits and accidents and unpaid tickets and everything else, right?
Yeah. So first of all, on just the liability side, at first glance, you think, oh wow, what insurance company is going to insure teenage drivers, right? But actually, what you're doing is every car of ours that's on the road has two people who are working very hard to drive that car safely. And so our collision rate is actually really low. And if you compare that to other fleets where you have someone zipping from place to place trying to meet a deadline and maybe they're distracted or whatever, compare that to our experience where yeah, you've got a 16-year-old behind the wheel, and if they don't have if they're early in their driving journey, you're not going on the highway. You're not going to Main Street with pedestrians and whatnot. You're doing laps around residential areas, slow and steady, working on parking, working on sort of just the basic navigation. And the instructor in the passenger seat, they're trained to grab the wheel. They've got a brake on their side. They're they're scanning. They've got a mirror on their side. They're sort of looking around at what could be challenges coming the way of their student. And so what that means is, yeah, we have little bang ups from time to time. We lose the odd mirror on a garbage can, but in terms of sort of significant collisions, it's very, very rare. But then on the second part, you're sort of asking about the due diligence process. So we make all these acquisitions as asset purchases,
Hmm.
and that is, I think, another thing that we are sort of able to do because we have a platform already.
Hmm.
Is that the instructors we hire over to Coastline, and the vehicles we transfer to Coastline, we transfer over the lease, and basically the operation can continue business as usual in a way where if you're buying business number one, that's much harder to do with an asset purchase.
So I'm thinking you said something caught me off guard there on the like when you start somebody new, they don't go into ongoing traffic and stuff. Do these schools actually have like locations? Like I have flashbacks of me going back to the kid where my dad decided, okay, winter's coming. I need to teach you how to drive on ice. So he drove into town with me in the passenger seat. We got to the school parking lot, and this is before the school had the cool concrete things everywhere. And he said, "He said, get in the driver's seat." And I was like, "Okay, there's ice everywhere." he says, "Get going about 10 miles an hour." It's like, "Okay." And he goes, "Slam on the brake." And then truck starts to spin. He goes, "Turn left." He's like, "Do it again. Do it again. Do it again till you didn't spin out." And so getting the experience to feel what happens when you lose control or when there's something, going on, or like, do these facilities actually have, or have you guys located like empty parking lots and stuff where the people can try to park without other stuff obstacles around, or try to parallel park between two lines as opposed between two cars and stuff?
Mhm. Yeah, so basically most regions that we operate in,
Mhm,
the instructors, they know the routes where you need to go in order to find that street with no cars on it, as a good practice.
mhm.
Most of our students we pick up from home, and so if that's a brand new student, their very first time behind the wheel, if they're in a quiet residential area, they'll just get in and start driving. If they're not, the instructor will drive for a couple of minutes to get to a good sort of starting point. But the majority of the behind the wheel time is on public roads. It's just we can be thoughtful about what road they're on depending on where they're at in their progression. And yeah, we set up cones. Okay, there's nobody on a street. You need to learn parallel parking. Well, first you learn to just pull up to the curb. Then you work on parking between cones. Then you can do cars, right? We just sort of everything's a progression.
That's interesting. I was just curious, the curiosity of how you take somebody that's never been behind the wheel and get them not only proficient behind the wheel, but comfortable under high pressure situations, because that's where you save
Hmm.
lives, right? Like,
Hmm.
how to get somebody to be comfortable when things are unexpected, when the surprises happen.
And that's having that instructor in the car makes a huge difference there, right? Because if you're practicing with your parents, we really recommend that you're just reinforcing the skills that you already learned in a lesson,
Mhm,
just getting that sort of practice time. But then you're going out and doing something new. Do that with an instructor because they can push the student a little bit. They can be going through a residential area with stop signs. The driver misses the stop sign, you can wait a little bit until it's clearly that they missed it, and then you can throw on the brakes. And they're like, "Whoa, what happened?" Well, it's a stop sign right there. Or you're learning to drive on the freeway, and you can be doing the merge, and the student doesn't see a car. The instructor for sure sees it, and they can take the wheel and they can navigate that situation. And then there's that aha moment that happens with the student,
mhm.
like, "Oh wow, I totally didn't see it. Yeah, remember the 10 times I told you to check your blind spot? Well, there you go. That's why." And then it clicks. And I think that's a lot harder to do when you're just practicing with a parent because they don't have that sort of training and they also don't have the break on their side.
That, and they may not have the patience, right? I know that
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for somebody to be patient with another person's children when you don't have all the stuff that children tend to wanna do to their own parents, right? But, there's something to be said about, like, having proper training in some of these things. You guys have put together, now how long have you been in business?
We taught our first lesson in 2018. So
Hmm.
6 years.
6 years. So you've got 6 years of lessons learned, and so for every time you have a little incident, every time you have something going on, you can take that and apply that experience across an entire network. Do you mind sharing how many locations you guys are currently in?
So we're in 8 states, 15 major metro areas. And then we started in California. So we're sort of the deepest in California, and
Mhm.
we cover 95% of zip codes in California.
What's the craziest thing you've ever seen? I mean, I love always, like, sharing stories. So, maybe through the acquisition, did you ever buy anything that was like, okay, you bought something way too big? Or I know you buy a lot of small operators. You had any
Yeah.
surprises in all these acquisitions?
I mean, I think a lot of learnings, but basically, when you're buying a small school, worst case scenario, it's just like you've hired a couple of folks, right? So we treat part of the acquisition process just like a hiring process. So we work out terms with the seller, and then we interview the staff, and assuming all the instructors meet our quality standards, which generally they will if we've gotten that far with the seller, it's a good school, great reviews, etc. Then we either get a lot of value out of it because they've built a great business that we can sort of build on, or we get some good folks and a few cars, and we sort of just build it ourselves from there. So We really don't have any sort of horror stories on the acquisition side. And I think one of the things that we really learned through this process is that I approach this as an entrepreneur initially thinking, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm not going to do the status quo in the industry here. We're going to do things differently. We've got all these big ideas. And then with each school we acquire, we learn something and oh, each time the types of things we learn is more like, "Oh, you know what? That actually really works." We didn't want to have a, let's say, classroom with where we teach driver's ed in a classroom environment because it's got overhead and whatever. They can do it online. But we acquire a couple of schools that have classrooms, and it's like that actually works really well. The kids love it. Certain students don't resonate very well with online learning, and especially post COVID, it's like they're kind of done with online learning. So, hey, that works kind of well. So, instead of just cutting that, we're actually going to lean into it. And I think that's one of the big sort of surprises for me is that we come in with an open mind, but also kind of thinking that we're going to make some changes once we kind of really get a handle on things. And more often than not, the types of things that they have developed in their local market over the 30 years they've run the school, probably worth keeping.
Do you use any technology as in, like, there's so much technology out now with VR and simulators and, driving simulators, like, there's some that are video game related, but there's some that are fairly realistic in the driving realms. They, even have pneumatics that move the thing. Do you guys use anything like that in your training, or is it straight old school, get in a car and turn the ignition over?
Yeah, we have one of our locations, we have a couple of simulators.
Mhm.
It's sort of an experiment. The challenge is that in most states, the student is required to take a certain number of hours of behind the wheel training. And most customers want to pay the minimum amount to get the state requirement. And so the simulator time is valuable experience, but it's over and above what they'd be required to take just by the state standards. And so it hasn't become something that we're like really leaning into as a business, but we're continuing to sort of explore that. And as the technology for the sort of simulators, VR, et cetera, becomes cheaper and cheaper and becomes more readily available, we're trying to figure out how that fits in a way that it doesn't add a lot of cost for families who are really just trying to shop for what they need in order to get their new driver licensed.
Yeah. Do you do any of the ancillary services like, defensive driving, all the other stuff some of these driving schools happen to have because there's just the state requires defensive driving if you want to get points knocked off your insurance, or you guys do those things too, or?
Yeah, so we've been super focused on the training of new drivers
Mhm,
because we feel like that's the way to fulfill our mission. That's what's really going to help us reduce the collision rate. We have developed a defensive driving course. We also license courses and such in states that we're not licensed in ourselves yet, just because it is inevitably something that people need.
mhm.
But we're really focused on that sort of new driver training process. And I think as an entrepreneur, there's only so many things you can do really well. And so the more different things you do, the harder it is to do every one of those well. Same thing with the VR. I would love nothing more than to build like a really good VR simulator for driving, but that's like its own business,
Oh, yeah.
right? To really do that well. And so we've kind of dabbled with those types of ideas and inevitably come back to, well, let's just take that same energy we were going to apply over there and focus on making the thing that we're already good at even better.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious on that because I know there's all kinds of classes people the state mandates, right, that people have
Mhm.
to take. I was in Oklahoma and Texas when I was young. I used to get a few speeding tickets, right? I'm kind of old and
Yeah.
grumpy now, and I drive an old beat up car, so I'm not into my fancy speed sports cars anymore. Mainly because I know I'm an adrenaline junkie, and if the speedometer says it'll go 180, and somehow I believe it's it's a car possible, I always look for a location, right? I had a souped up little Nissan once that I didn't believe what the speedometer said on it, like, there's no way this car goes anywhere near that, so one night at 3 a.m., I tried to take a run for it and got pulled over and got all kinds of trouble,
Oh, yeah.
so that was kind of the like, "I probably should stop all this, I'm getting too old for this nonsense," but that said, do you is there room later on maybe, like, are you looking for things like I would think for my kid, if he got his driver's license and I still thought he was uncomfortable behind the wheel, I'd want to see if you had an advanced course, right? Yeah, he's got his license now.
Mhm.
Yeah, he passed the state minimum, but I'd like to pay
Yeah.
for somebody to do an advanced course to get him comfortable, right?
Yeah, so we have a significant percentage of our customers who buy extra lessons,
Mhm.
and that means we can sort of they fit into sort of 2 camps. One is the parents don't wanna be very involved in the training, and they're just like, "You guys do this." And so that's one group. The second group is those who they go through the core training, they've built the core skills, and then now they wanna do one more lesson to really, like, make sure they're ready not just to pass the test, but to spend 2 hours going through the extra stuff that's not part of the test, that more time on the freeway, more time sort of correcting the sort of the bad habits that pop up after you've been driving for 6 months, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. I think there's some schools out there that do a really good job with the sort of performance type driving, where you have an empty airstrip and you can work on skids and that kind of thing. And I think for us to do that well requires like a high density of students in a particular area. And so we're a few years out from that now because we're spread out across a very large geographic area. But as we sort of build up, we can start doing more things that require, hey, we got to be able to put 10 students a day through this program to make it pay for itself, and it's only going to be 10% of our students. All right, well, we need to be at 100 students a day in this market before we can do this other thing. And so it's definitely something I want to be able to do because I've done some of those trainings myself, and it makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
It also requires its own operation.
I'd say that my little dream, I think I probably paid $25,000 for training to my dream to be a NASCAR driver. I spent a ton of money, and I mean, we were in the fireproof suits and everything, but they would teach you how to drive through spin it when other people spin out, like how to pick a line and go through it, and you never even slow down, never hit your brakes or anything. You just picked the line and went through it because that's the safest mode most time, right? That said, I think it's probably saved my life a few times because I live in the country, deer step out in front of me, and I just don't panic. Right,
Yep.
I pick a line that's safely. Usually, it's behind the deer, not where they're
Uh-huh.
headed, right? But a few times where I think the training, even my wife's like, "Oh my god, I would have panicked if that happened to me. How did you not blink an eye?" Right? Somebody
Hmm.
swerved out in front of us or whatever, and I just react, just did the natural thing. I said, very expensive training, right? But not everybody
Yep.
can get that. But there's got to be some level to, like, I'm terrified when my son starts to drive here because we live in a vacation destination, and constantly
Hmm.
people just walk out between cars into the road because there's a beach down there. So you'll be driving down
Hmm.
the road, and you got to really like start watching between cars and stuff. Kids will run out between cars. Like, you got to go real slow through downtown here, especially like on the nights and weekends. There's a bunch of bars down there, so people may or may not be intoxicated when they stumble out in the road,
Hmm.
right? I've driven through town to go get something. The wife in the middle of the night sent me to the grocery store for something that she needed for her way to work or something, and I was awake anyway. And pulled into town, there was somebody in the middle of the road asleep. We got him some help because I didn't leave that there. I pulled over anyway. That said, yeah, they they were asleep and they slurred horribly when we started talking to them. Like, they were anyway, slobbering all over the place. That said, I'm just terrified, like, when you live in an environment where there's all kinds of stuff, there's deer in the road, there's stuff popping out. Having just years and years of experience is something, but to take a new person that's never seen that, put
Hmm.
them behind the wheel, right? What you guys are doing is invaluable. It's like it's one of the most valuable things you can do is get somebody for not only for their own safety, but for the safety of the people around them when they're driving. But, no, I was curious on the advanced courses or something that they can do as a follow-on or buy a few extra classes. I love that you have extra lessons, right? The parents can
Yeah.
and sometimes I'll probably start teaching my kid as soon as I can legally do it, and then still do the state requirement, and then I'll just drive around with him, right? I tease him. I always
Hmm.
like, he's 13 now. When we get towards the car, I throw him the keys. When he catches, like, "Okay, you have to drive." He's like, "No, I can't drive yet." Like, "All right, not yet. You're 2 years from being my chauffeur, buddy." So I'm not.
Uh,
You think I'm
y-
kidding? Whenever he turns 16 and gets his license for fun, I'm gonna buy him a little chauffeur hat. I'm gonna stick it on him, and I'm gonna get in the back seat, right? I'm gonna just sit in the back seat.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect this to be the next stage in my career, but as soon as I did my own training as an instructor and started being out there teaching myself, it's incredibly rewarding. And I think it's really hard for parents to do for all the reasons you mentioned earlier, right? I mean, you have this all this history with your own kid, and you're you got all this stress involved in them growing up and gaining independence, and also navigating a really dangerous environment. Um, but as a trained driving instructor, every new student, they come in very respectful. Like, they are there to learn. They know it's a challenging skill and it's dangerous. And it's just so rewarding to take them through that journey and see the light bulb go off and, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. So yeah, I just love it.
I imagine you also have a few of those students come through and you just look at them, you're like, "This guy's gonna be on the racetrack in a week," right? You just there's certain people you get in I had to have been that guy for anybody that would've like I said, I didn't have to take the classes that weren't mandated in our state, and my dad had already taught me to drive by the time of that, but I had been racing dirt bikes, and I've done the little where they take the beat up car and go around the mud track too. I've done
Yep.
that a few times, and I tried go-kart. I tried all kinds of stuff. I tried go-karts, the really fast ones, sprint cars. On practice night, we'd jump in each other on nights we were practicing, we'd jump in each other's equipment, like, "Hey, can I run your sprint, thing around the track by myself a few times?" Like, towards the end of the night. Like, yeah, so you get to experience all this stuff. So by the time I was
Yeah.
behind the wheel, I had spun out and crashed in everything that had wheels, right?
Yeah. So actually, I think those are the hardest students to teach, because, and we get a lot of these folks, right? The
Mhm.
farm kids who, hey, look, I already know. Like, I've been driving a tractor since I was 10 years old. Like, I know what I'm doing. Yes, you can hold the steering wheel and which pedals which, and you can keep the car between the lines. But there's a whole lot more to driving than that. And so when a student comes in knowing they need to learn, even if they're nervous and such, you can build them up bit by bit. When they come in with just huge teenage confidence and the skills to back it up, it's a lot harder to sort of, okay, look, we got to take this back a level here. It's not the same as navigating a farm vehicle, because you got all these other drivers out there, and that's what we need to train for. So I think you would have been a challenging student if you had
Yeah,
signed
I
up with us.
remembered my when I was 14 and a half, about 15, my dad bought a car, and he said, "This will be yours when you're 16." It was an old '77 Ford Maverick, bright red, white. I'd take it right now. It was a beautiful car. Had an inline six-cylinder in it, and I was probably no, I was probably at least 7, 8 months. So I was 14, almost 15, and you have to be 15 and a half in Oklahoma to get your permit. So I was still 8 months out or so, and he said, "Just" it was a good deal. One of the ladies that he's painting a house, she was trying to get rid of it, so he bought it. And it had an straight inline six-cylinder in it, which was pretty fast for that little car, and I blew the engine racing it within the first year I owned it. So, yeah, I would have been the tough kid, right? I was taking the thing and lining it up against other people's car on the quarter mile, right, and threw a rod right through the hood, that
Huh.
car, because it was so light, that little inline six-cylinder really made it move. And I regret it because it was a beautiful little car, but within the first few weeks of having it, we had 26 acres. I was in the middle of the field cutting donuts and figure eights, doing what kids today would call drifting on dirt though, right, in this car. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I understood how to control the car. What eye opener is for most people when they grow up on a farm and stuff like that is all the stuff people do around you that's stupid, like pull out in front of
Hmm.
you and don't stop at their light and all those things, right? You never expect that
Yeah.
would be what most of those kids would be the awakening is they're driving down the road and other people are doing stupid stuff around them. So,
Yep. Yep. Totally.
what's it like to run a business that's so diverse across a landscape, right? Are you traveling constantly? You do a lot of it Zoom calls, or how do you manage something that has so many locations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Zoom most days. I do a little bit of travel, especially recent, like after we close an acquisition, I try to get out there myself just to meet the team and such. But it really comes down to the regional operators. And so we have a large geographic area, but most of that is sort of managed at my level through metrics and through the management of the team. And so we make sure that each local operation gets the support it needs, centralized customer support, and then our fleet support, and the, those sort of HQ level layers of support. And then also the sort of the local manager, that they're not dedicated to managing like the single store essentially location that we may have acquired, but a few of them in a regional area. And so they can travel from place to place, and they're that sort of direct point of relationship for each person. And so at the end of the day, it just looks like, I think, any other business that has, 400 employees. It's just that they don't all fit into one office.
I'm curious as to the going I'm just trying to think here on the all those locations, you've got regional managers running them. Uh, is there ever a case where you buy something, it's really small, and then it's a different market? I'm trying to think. I'm a marketing nerd by previous trade. That's my
Mhm.
master's degree. My MBA is in marketing. I'm thinking part of this the driver school is there's a benefit because it's state required in a lot of states, right? But there's also
Mm.
it's gotta be a low barrier to entry. You need a car and a certification, right? So, are you entering markets that have a ton of competition, or is it fairly is there a barrier to entry? Are those licenses really hard to get here in California, or what's the moat to keep people out of your space?
Yeah, I mean, it requires some effort to get the license, but it's not really there's nothing stopping you from saying, "Hey, you know what? I love teaching my kid to drive. I'm gonna start a driving school and serve my local community." The way we think about it is that we're not trying to outcompete every local driving school. My end game here is that every new driver in America is going to choose between Coastline and a local driving school, maybe that their parents went to or that's been in the community for a very long time. And we will try to create that local experience everywhere we are, but not everyone is going to choose us. And so there's a lot of things that you get when you choose Coastline that you don't get at a local driving school. But one thing you get at a local driving school is, hey, maybe they've been in that location for 30 years and they've gone to every Main Street parade in town and everybody loves them. And hey, great, like keep doing that. And we'll also be available in that community for those who choose us. And the, I think for a lot of people, the challenges that come with running a small business is a lot of the types of challenges maybe they didn't think that they were going to be encountering when they decided to start it. They think, oh, I want to start a driving school because I want to teach drivers. Well, guess what? As soon as you start a driving school business, you're going to spend most of your stressful moments dealing with the business side, making payroll, the instructor not showing up, or a customer that's unhappy, or whatever the case may be. And so we've had quite a few people join Coastline who were considering starting their own business, but ultimately just decided, hey, I actually just want to teach. And so, yeah, I think there's not a huge barrier to entry to new folks coming into the market, but I think it's a whole other thing to build something at the scale that we have. And so we don't see really any competition at the sort of the scale that we're at. We just for each market that we're in, it's us and a few local schools that sort of all together serve the community.
I'd imagine you get some owner operators that wanna sell because they just wanna teach, right? I see that in
Yeah.
some other areas where it's a passion project to start with. I see that kick in where, for instance, little cleaning company I was looking at in Oklahoma, I own a pest control there company, but a little I always thought I'm gonna buy a cleaning company because who finds more bugs than the cleaning lady, right? I'll call my pest control company. But I was talking to one lady, she had 5 crews of 2, so she had 10 employees and herself, and she's like, "I just wanna clean, I don't wanna do any of this anymore, I wanna make payroll, I don't wanna" like,
Yeah.
you give me a job, I'll manage these 4 people have really worked well with me, I'll watch those, you watch the rest of those people, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
she needed to go back to her she was from another country, but, you probably guessed which one, but I'm not gonna do that here, but she had to go back home, her father was ill, and somebody needed to kinda help the in-house nurses and stuff take care of him. So I didn't think I could run this without her, right? Like, I've never
Mhm.
if you've seen my desk right now, you'd realize I'm not the most organized person to start with. So, it was one of those, "Okay, I don't think I wanna operate this thing because I don't" like, when you're buying something new that you've never run before, you really need that operator, you need that or somebody in there that's like, they know where all the hidden secrets are, they know the schedule, they know everything, and the fact that she was leaving in a week It didn't work for me. But I'd imagine in
Mhm.
your space, you do have quite a few like, "Hey, I'll come back and drive for you. I just don't wanna run any of the rest of this stuff anymore." Maybe they're not great at
Yeah.
marketing and it's stressful, or they're not great at dealing with mad parents, right? That's stressful. They just don't wanna deal
Mhm.
with any. They just wanna help the children. They wanna help the teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely get that. And even just across our driving instructors, a lot of folks are retired, early retirees
Mhm.
out of the military or first responders or whatnot, out of education. And so they can retire when they're 55. And what do you do next? Well, teaching driving is a great way to be a part-time, have a part-time job and give back to your community and do something important. And so we find that with a few of the schools that we acquire as well, is that the owner, they don't want to work 60, 80 hours a week anymore. They want to be able to cash out and retire, but they also don't want to just sit on a beach somewhere. They want to keep doing the thing that they love. And so they can work 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, and do the thing they already know how to do really well and be happy.
Do you guys get a lot of these things, do they have, dated equipment where you have to bring in your fleet or anything? Or do you typically use what? I imagine that the to go along with your brand and you're going national, you can't just have everybody driving 1980s model Toyota coupes, right?
Uh-huh. So we generally start with whatever cars that they have already so that we can have a continuing operation, but they all get detailed, they get rebranded, and as we replace them out, which we try not to do a whole fleet at the same time, we'll just cycle them out over time, and they get replaced with brand new Corollas. And I think that makes a big difference for the employees. Like, hey, I was driving a 10-year-old Hyundai, and now I'm driving a brand new Corolla. And also for the students, it makes a statement for Coastline coming in, is that as we change over the brand to Coastline, we're also changing over the fleet in some cases to newer cars.
Do you have a variety of sizes of cars? Because I know, like, I drive a thing that looks like a boat now, but I gave up on, I buy my cars from auctions and stuff like that these days. I usually find a dealer buddy who has a dealer license and say, "Hey, take me and let's just go pick something out I can pay cash for." The wife usually drives something that's fairly new with a warranty and everything because, you need one stable one in the stable car in the family. I don't have a car. I haven't had a car payment in 15 years, but I usually have a mechanic's payment. Right? I'm always having something worked on it. The back latch of the thing I'm driving now, it doesn't open, so you have to, like, crawl through it and pop it from the inside. In the back, it's a station wagon looking thing I haul things around in. But if I'm gonna spend money on something, it's probably gonna be a Harley. That said, it's some what about different like, is are all the same, like, mid-size Toyota Corolla, I'm thinking two-door, four-door Corollas? Or
Yeah, yeah, they're all four-door Corollas. We try to have a uniform fleet, kinda like Southwest. If you got all 737s, it makes the whole operation run smoother. So, the only sort of non-standard cars we have in the fleet are ones that came across via acquisition,
Mhm.
and those will get sort of replaced out over time. And so that means our fleet operations, someone throws an error code or they have a flat or whatever, and we have standard equipment. We got a whole box full of mirrors. You lose a mirror, no problem. We'll get a new one in. It'll be black initially, but we'll get you back on the road the same day. So yeah, I think that's part of how we can run a smooth operation is keeping a uniform fleet. And almost everyone can fit in a Corolla. It's not a tiny little car.
Mm.
It's it's a decent car. The driver's seat goes up and down as well. So the taller kids they can lower it all the way down. The shorter kids they can move it up. So yeah.
Good car too, good decently safe car too. Yeah, I got a joke or a joke kinda thing. I was like, "If you ever really wanna teach one of those kids how to drive, send them down to Acapulco or Mexico somewhere where the lanes in the road mean nothing and you're gonna lose your mirror. But if you drive there for more than a week, you're gonna lose at least one mirror, right? Because somebody's gonna come zipping by in a little taxi or something and take off a mirror." So, I used to go down there
Uh-huh.
all the time. I thought I was a really good driver until I came down there and, like, the lanes mean nothing, right? During certain times of the day, you might have 3 it's a two-lane road, but you might have 3 lanes going one way and 2 lanes going back, and then other half of the day, they switched it, but it's only wide enough for 2 lanes of cars, but they got somehow 5 lanes of cars cutting through the area. But, and there's still
Uh,
I haven't been there since, I'm dating myself, probably 15, 20 years now, but back when the last time I went, maybe 20, 22 years, but last time I went down there, they still had a bunch of VW Bugs and small vehicles too, right? So
yeah.
That was a drive. You think once you think you're a really good driver, go try to drive in another world, a third world country or another area where they just play by different rules because it's a wake up call. So um,
Hmm.
I appreciate you being here, man. How do people reach out to you if they want to? If maybe they got it, maybe they have a small, locally operated driver's education school that they want to sell, or maybe
Yeah.
they want to do something similar in their state, and you're not there. They want to work with you or something. How do people reach out to you and have a conversation?
Yeah, sure. Well, anyone who's in that space can just email me, Nigel at coastlineacademy.com. There's a little section of our website that explains how to sell your school at coastlineacademy.com. And yeah, happy to chat, whether it's something for right away or just thinking about down the road, starting a conversation and building a relationship where we can work together later. Happy to connect.
I love what you guys did. Thank you for being here. I think we'll call that a show. Hang out for a few seconds after the mic's off. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.